We're coming off a wild week of fantasy football, guys. And honestly, the wide receivers in fantasy football right now, a lot of them are just going absolutely nuts. I mean, we've got literally 7 wide receivers averaging 18 fantasy points per game at the very minimum. The wide receiver position is more important now than it has ever been in fantasy football. So today we're going through the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 4 fantasy football, guys. And at the end of the video, as we always do at the end of our wide receiver rankings videos, we pick my favorite underdog flex option of the week outside of these particular rankings, guys. And real quick, we're giving away another white hat. Another FFN white hat is going to go to one of you guys randomly. All you need to do, just go down there in the comments and give me your hottest take in week 4 fantasy football, and you will have a chance to win this FFN white hat. And I'm up at 1 a.m. filming this, and I'll be up all night making sure it gets out to you guys. So please go down there and drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show the support to the channel. But let's go ahead and dive into these rankings, man. So our first tier of guys, you've obviously got your top 2 guys right here. Tyreek Hill, there's no question about this one. Taking on the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo this week, there's just simply no question here with Tyreek Hill. This dude has been just unbelievably a stud, averaging almost 150 yards per game, almost 26 fantasy points per game, and over a touchdown per game. Like, there's nothing you could say to me that would make me put him outside number 1. And obviously, the next guy is just as good, Justin Jefferson, taking on the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. I mean, when you look at what Justin Jefferson is doing, he's averaging over 150 yards per game. That's crazy to me that he is still not the wide receiver 2 in fantasy football right now. He's still fantastic, man. He's still averaging almost 13 targets a game. Justin Jefferson has been elite. And amongst the many problems that Minnesota's having, Justin Jefferson is not one of them. The reality that he's dealing with is he's just dealing with an insane start from 2 other wide receivers, Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen. That's the reason he's not the wide receiver 2 in fantasy football right now. Matchup doesn't matter with him, just like it doesn't for Tyreek Hill. But moving down to our next tier of guys, obviously you've got a great tier of guys here as well. And starting out at number 3, we've got Keenan Allen taking on the Las Vegas Raiders at home in Los Angeles this week. I mean, Keenan Allen is off to an unbelievable start in fantasy football this year. You can see it on the screen what he has done. It's honestly crazy what he has done in fantasy football. The reality with this situation is that Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, his offense is just so perfect for everybody on this team. It's just the perfect offensive setup, and he even threw a touchdown pass in this recent week 3 game versus the Minnesota Vikings. Now Mike Williams is down for the year with a torn ACL. That means that Keenan Allen is going to be even more leaned on than he already is. Keenan Allen is set up for so much more success in fantasy this year. All he needs to do is stay healthy. And for the short term, the matchup is great this week. Number 4, guy finally broke out. It's Jamar Chase taking on the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. Now, I mentioned him in my buy low trade target video before week 3 fantasy football. I hope you bought him because those buy low days, they were short-lived. You're not getting Jamar Chase at a discount anymore. He's a great player, and he came back to doing great things in week 3 on Monday night versus the Los Angeles Rams. The matchup is irrelevant. When Jamar Chase and the Bengals are on, it doesn't matter what the matchup is. But if it did matter, and this is great, Tennessee is like the perfect matchup for a wide receiver in fantasy. They are awful at defending the pass. I think Jamar Chase gets back to being who he is, which is a tremendous fantasy football player. Number 5, also Davante Adams taking on the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles this week. Again, he was another guy included on my buy low trade target video, but this time it was after week 1, after you had that bad game. Again, I hope you bought him because if you did, it totally has worked out for you since then. This guy is such an elite wide receiver in the NFL, and the reality is elite wide receivers are elite wide receivers. And what I mean by that is unless you have a Garrett Wilson situation where he's dealing with not even a real NFL quarterback, you're going to be totally fine in fantasy football. He dominates the team in target share. Jimmy Garoppolo is good enough to get him the ball, and he's coming off a great week in fantasy football. He's taking on possibly a worse pass defense this week against the Los Angeles Chargers than he took on last week against Pittsburgh. There's just no question that Davante Adams belongs in your top 5. basically every single week. Number 6, A.J. Brown taking on the Washington Commanders in Philadelphia this week. Again, another buy low guy that I had in my video last week of buy low trade targets. Again, hope you got him because it's over now. You can't buy him low anymore. You cannot buy him low. He went off in that week 3 game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The dude is back. The matchup is irrelevant for A.J. Brown. This guy is just the real deal in fantasy football, and it continues to keep up. Stephon Diggs at number 7, taking on the Miami Dolphins in Buffalo this week. Now, I will say that the interesting thing about Miami is obviously their offense is great, and that's what gets all the headlines, and obviously that's what people see. But their defense is much better than we thought it would be heading into the season. Now, again, Stephon Diggs is in the territory that the matchup doesn't really matter as much here because, I mean, he was great against Sauce Gardner in week 1 versus the New York Jets. I think he's going to be great again here versus Xavier Howard. Buffalo is rolling right now. They've got their swagger back. They've got the offense back together again. Everything is working out. Everything's clicking. It makes sense. Stephon Diggs here, easy top 7 guy. Number 8. Mr. Surprise himself, and it shouldn't be that much of a surprise, but it is to me, Deebo Samuel versus the Arizona Cardinals, man. Now, I took my loss on Deebo Samuel on Monday night after the Monday Night Football game. Every week, we do what we got right and what we got wrong on this channel to make sure that we're being transparent and honest with you guys. And before the season, I was saying, don't draft this guy. He looks like his 2021 version again. Deebo Samuel looks fantastic. Now, the problem with Deebo Samuel is he is considered day-to-day after suffering a rib injury in that Thursday night win versus the New York Giants. At Arizona, the other problem is their defense is actually a lot tougher than we once thought as well. Arizona looks like a legitimately tough team, but it doesn't matter. San Francisco is such a better team than Arizona. They're one of the best teams in the league, if not the very best. And if Deebo Samuel plays, he's absolutely a top 10 guy in fantasy football right now. Number 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown taking on the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay this week. Now, really, there's not much to say here with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, he's just literally like basically as consistent as it gets in fantasy football. I mean, this guy just doesn't miss games, and he doesn't have bad games. Amon-Ra St. Brown is so consistent, and Josh Reynolds was totally irrelevant in this offense in week 3. Amon-Ra St. Brown is never irrelevant. That's just not what he does. The matchup is okay against Green Bay. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. Amon-Ra St. Brown rarely is going to be outside of my top 10. Number 10, CeeDee Lamb taking on the New England Patriots in Dallas this week. They're back at home, coming off a bad week, man. I also included CeeDee Lamb on Monday's buy low video before week 4 fantasy football. I advise you to take advantage of this right now. This is a buy low opportunity for a true wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. And CeeDee Lamb, like, he hasn't been bad. Like, it's not that he's just been bad. You can see his numbers on the screen right now. Nothing about it has just been bad, but it's just not been great. It's not what you want to see from a guy like CeeDee Lamb. But here's what I'll say about this one. I actually think this matchup may play into his favor. And the reason I say that is because we've discussed it for years on this channel. Bill Belichick is known for taking away your best option on offense. And I believe he believes that Tony Pollard is that guy. Not that he doesn't have respect for CeeDee Lamb, but I think he acknowledges that he wants to make Dak throw because Dak is really not that good of a quarterback. And I think that that's where it plays into CeeDee Lamb's favor this week. I think he's going to get a lot of targets this week. Dallas, like we said, back at home. I think CeeDee Lamb has the bounce back game this week. Devonta Smith versus the Washington Commanders in Philadelphia this week. Now, obviously, Devonta Smith's coming off a pretty bad week for his standards right now in fantasy football. The week 3 matchup on Monday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't go in his favor. It went in A.J. Brown's favor instead. It's a very similar situation to T. Higgins in Cincinnati. One of these two guys, and sometimes both of them are going to go off, and then sometimes they're just not going to have great weeks, though. You can never bench Devonta Smith. That's just not the reality with Devonta Smith. You can't bench him, and especially in this matchup where the Buffalo Bills just absolutely abused the Washington Commanders just a couple of days ago. You can't sit Devonta Smith in this type of matchup, let alone ever. Number 12, we've got Puka Nacua taking on the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis this week. Now, Puka Nacua, he was great the first 2 weeks, and he's a guy that definitely is going to be good for at least until Cooper Kupp gets back. I'm interested to see what his volume does when Cooper Kupp comes back, but we're not there yet. Cooper Kupp's out at least another week. but he fell back down to earth on Monday night versus the Cincinnati Bengals. It still wasn't a bad performance. Like, he didn't like just come out and give you a goose egg or anything even close to that. He was still pretty good. But you could tell, and I watched that game. I watch every game, but I watched that full game, and I saw that Cincinnati definitely made a concerted effort to stop him. Like, they were definitely treating him as a true wide receiver one, and they were rolling coverages towards Puka Nacua. This is going to be one to watch. I think that Puka Nacua, like I said, he's going to stay relevant in this offense, but he was on a record-setting pace in a lot of different categories through the first 2 weeks. The volume's still there. He's still a good player, but we're probably just going to see him come back to reality over the next several weeks. Number 13, Amari Cooper, taking on the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore this week. Now, I said it all week last week. I said Amari Cooper was going to be great in fantasy football in week 3, and he lived up to it. This is the reality with Amari Cooper for the rest of the season. This team needs him now more than ever. No Nick Chubb, they're going to rely heavily on their second best playmaker in the offense, which is Amari Cooper. That's his reality here. So I don't really care what the matchup is moving forward. The matchup's not bad here against the Baltimore Ravens, but I don't really care. As long as he is going to be healthy, he's going to be a top 15 wide receiver easily in fantasy football for me on a week-to-week basis, regardless of the matchup. Number 14, the guy who has just been rising in my rankings every single week, Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts, taking on the Los Angeles Rams in Indianapolis this week. Man, Michael Pittman's stock has significantly rose up over the last several weeks. I've been beating this drum for several weeks now. I want every piece of this Indianapolis offense when it comes to Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is honestly a must-start guy now. He was really good last week without Anthony Richardson. With Gardner Minshew, he was still really, really good. Now, obviously, he's better with Anthony Richardson, but that just goes to show that Michael Pittman is probably going to have his best year in fantasy this year. He's also on a contract year. Definitely worth noting here. This team should get Anthony Richardson back this week, and this is also versus a team that Cincinnati Bengals just ripped up as well. I love Michael Pittman. At this point, like I said, he's basically a must-start guy, and he will definitely be inside the top 15 every single week. DK Metcalf at 15, taking on the New York Giants in New York this week. Now, obviously, DK Metcalf had the big game in week 3, but here's the thing about DK Metcalf. The volume is still really unstable. You can see it on the screen, like, every one of those guys we went through, they're usually averaging at least like 8 targets a game. Not DK Metcalf. He averages 6.3 targets per game through 3 weeks. Like, this guy is not that consistent with his volume. It's a very volatile offense. They've obviously got Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba at some point is going to get going. DK Metcalf is still a good play though, because he is a big play threat, and this matchup is absolutely fantastic against the New York Giants defense that has been absolutely horrendous this year. I love the matchup. You can't sit DK Metcalf in this type of matchup. Same thing applies to Tyler Lockett here at 16. Hard to predict exactly which one of them is going to go off on a week-to-week basis. This week, I could see them both going off. I mean, this defensive matchup is so good for the Seattle Seahawks. Number 17, Jalen Waddle taking on the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo this week. Now, obviously, Jalen Waddle missed last week, and he missed out on the fun and the big party they had dropping a 70 burger on the Denver Broncos this week. Obviously, he missed out on that, and that may concern you to a point where it's like, maybe they don't even need him. Jalen Waddle is still the second best playmaker on this offense. Don't get it twisted here. Miami's offense is just that good, and that benefits everyone, including Jalen Waddle. Best offense in football. Matchup really doesn't matter when it comes to Miami Dolphins pass-catching options and really offensive options as a whole. Number 18, Calvin Ridley, taking on the Atlanta Falcons in Jacksonville this week. Now, I've been all over the map this year with Calvin Ridley, to be honest with you guys. Earlier in the offseason, said don't draft him. Don't do it. That's what I told everybody. Then after week 1, I took my loss and I said I was wrong on Calvin Ridley. He's had a bad stretch of games. The last 2 games, he's been pretty bad. The offense as a whole has been bad. Like, it's not just limited to Calvin Ridley. This passing offense in general has been pretty bad when you think about how good they should be. I actually consider Calvin Ridley a buy low trade target right now. The volume has been there. That's the reality here. The volume has not gone away. He's still averaging 8.7 targets per game, and he still leads the team in targets. The matchup is okay here. I think Calvin Ridley is literally just like a play or two away from having a great game in fantasy football, and that play can come on literally any given week, and it absolutely could happen here in week 4. 19, Chris Olave taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in New Orleans this week. Now, obviously, Chris Olave has dropped down my rankings, and there's a big reason for it, and it's Derek Carr. Derek Carr suffered a shoulder injury in the Week 3 loss versus the Green Bay Packers. So he's going to have to deal with Jameis Winston in all likelihood, all signs point to, in Week 4. It's not that Jameis Winston doesn't provide upside. Like, obviously he does. We've seen it over the years. But it definitely does lower the impact that Chris Olave will have this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in my opinion. It definitely lowers the ceiling, in my opinion. He's still the wide receiver 1 in this offense. It's still a decent matchup, but I do think that the ceiling is a little bit capped here. Number 20, T. Higgins taking on the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee this week. Rough week for T. Higgins. There's no doubt about that. It was really disappointing, especially coming off a really good Week 2 performance that we thought he was going to build on. Jamar Chase feasted, T. Higgins did not. He dropped a couple passes, he was inefficient. It wasn't a good game. Just a really bad game for T. Higgins, man. Tennessee is the perfect remedy for this, though. Like I said, like we've been talking about every single week, Tennessee is awful defending the pass. They are simply just awful. This offense is finding their groove now. They found their groove in Week 3 against the Los Angeles Rams. They're going to continue to keep finding it, and I think that they're going to take it out on Tennessee this week. I believe in T. Higgins. I got no issues with T. Higgins here this week. Number 21, Brandon Ayuk taking on the Arizona Cardinals in San Francisco this week. Listen, obviously he didn't go in Week 3, so it's disappointing to see him drop in fantasy rankings a little bit right here. He should be back in Week 4. That's what I've been reading. All signs are pointing to him being back in Week 4 fantasy football. This is a goodish matchup. Like we've discussed with Deebo Samuel, Arizona Cardinals defense has been better than we once thought they would be. So it does concern me a little bit just from the fact that Arizona is a better team than we thought. Brandon Ayuk is still great though. Averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game this year, 7 targets a game. Guy's really, really efficient with his work. Brandon Ayuk is always going to be in these top 30 rankings unless he's injured. Number 22. You might find this really, really low. Mike Evans here, taking on the New Orleans Saints. Again, this one probably feels like a super, super low ranking to you. I mean, the guy is literally red hot right now. He's the wide receiver 10 in fantasy football and half PPR right now. But there is a harsh reality here with Mike Evans here. He has a kryptonite, and his kryptonite is Marshon Lattimore, and it always has been throughout his entire career. And to prove it to you, let's walk through what he's done against Marshon Lattimore the past 2 seasons. In last year, in both games combined versus New Orleans, he had 15.5 fantasy points in last year's games versus Marshon Lattimore. In 2021, he had 13.7 combined points in both matchups in 2021 versus Marshon Lattimore. And when you combine all 4 of those games, both of those scores right there, and combine them and put them up against his Week 2 performance against Chicago, it barely outscores that performance. Just barely. 2 years, 4 matchups worth, barely beats his Week 2 performance. I'm not saying he's a bad play this week. Mike Evans is never a bad play, but there is a reason he's this low, so just be mindful of that. Christian Kirk at 23, taking on the Atlanta Falcons in Jacksonville this week. Christian Kirk's had a good couple of weeks. While Calvin Ridley has not been good, Christian Kirk has recovered this team. The matchup is good here, like I said, with Calvin Ridley. I don't have a problem with this matchup. The thing that I love the most about this situation, and the reason I was big on Christian Kirk before the season, is because he's got chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. He was the wide receiver 13 last year and half PPR. Christian Kirk is not just going away in this offense. He's going to continue to rise up my rankings, man, because he's got the chemistry, and as long as Calvin Ridley continues to falter, Christian Kirk is going to be there. 24, I've got Zay Flowers taking on the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland this week. I included him also on my list of buy low guys this week. I really like buying Zay Flowers right now. The volume is there for this guy, and also he's the clear wide receiver 1. There's not a question here who the wide receiver 1 is. Over 8 targets a game, 62 yards per game, and 10.3 fantasy points per game, and that's all without scoring a single touchdown yet. That's going to change here. This team is pissed off after a bad loss to a backup quarterback in Indianapolis. They're going to come out swinging, and I think that Zay Flowers gets another 10-target game. Number 25, Nico Collins taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers here. Now, obviously, I probably was a little bit overzealous putting Nico Collins inside of my top 10 in last week's rankings. I'll admit that for sure. It was a bad week he had in week 3. The Houston Texans were up big and big immediately in this game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. They controlled the whole game, and Nico Collins was pretty much left without much volume. The volume has still been there though when you combine the first 3 weeks and when you just look at the first 2 weeks. He's averaging 7.7 targets per game and over 86 yards per game. The guy is still a very good fantasy option, and Pittsburgh has a really bad pass defense, as we discussed earlier. This is a matchup I think Nico Collins could take advantage of. Number 26, Romeo Doubs taking on the Detroit Lions and Green Bay this week. The Green Bay situation is really weird, honestly. I mean, you've got Christian Watson probably going to be the wide receiver 1 at some point when he returns to action. That's the question. When is the guy gonna come back? Because as long as he's out, Romeo Doubs is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. That's just the simple reality here. Now, when Christian Watson returns, even in that first week back, I think Romeo Doubs will be relevant. That's why Romeo Doubs is going to be bust-proof here in my top 30 rankings right now, because regardless of if Christian Watson comes back, I think that the first week he does, Romeo Doubs is going to continue to be relevant in this offense. He belongs here at number 26. Number 27, George Pickens taking on the Houston Texans in Houston this week. Listen, George Pickens is such a great player. He honestly deserves just a way better offense. Like, if he was on a way better offense, this dude would be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. He's that good at football. But the reality is, he's too good for this offense. This offense sucks. It absolutely sucks. We say it all the time on this channel because we're not mincing words when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. They're not very good. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, grew up as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I'm a fantasy football analyst first, and we're going to be talking about reality, and we're going to be honest here in these videos. George Pickens is in a really bad situation offensively, and really the only reason he's inside the top 30 right now is because Deontay Johnson is out. If Deontay Johnson were playing, Pickens would probably have a tough time cracking this list right here. But obviously, he's got to take advantage of that right now, and that's why he's going to continue to be in the top 30. Tank Dell at number 28, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers in that same matchup at home. Now, I never thought I would see the day where Houston Texans would have 2 wide receivers in my top 30 rankings in 1 week. Never thought I'd see the day, man, but CJ Stroud has made it happen, man. Tank Dell deserves this one. I called Tank Dell my favorite waiver wire pickup of week 4 fantasy football, and I stand by it. Tank Dell has been great. CJ Stroud wanted Tank Dell in this draft, and he handpicked Tank Dell from this draft class, man. He's been great. I mean, look at the numbers right here. Super efficient with his work. He's got 2 touchdowns so far, 14.9 fantasy points per game. The matchup is great here. I like Tank Dell, and I'm going to be playing him in a lot of redraft leagues this week. Jacoby Myers at number 29, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles this week. Now, it does feel weird, right? We've got 2 Las Vegas wide receivers in my top 30, and their quarterback is Jimmy Garoppolo. It feels a little bit weird, right? But Jacoby Myers deserves it. I mean, look at the numbers, man. 18.3 fantasy points per game and 11 targets per game and 8 receptions per game. This guy has been really, really good for the Las Vegas Raiders, man. It's a great matchup here as well. The Chargers defense sucks at defending the pass. The matchup is just lining up here. Jacoby Myers absolutely could have a boom game this week. Number 30 rounded it out. Marquise Hollywood Brown taking on the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco this week. I also took my L on Marquise Hollywood Brown on my Monday night, what I got right, what I got wrong live stream. I think we just need to reassess this Arizona offense, man. I honestly think they're just better than we thought. But full disclosure, he would be higher on this list if he wasn't playing a great defense. That's the reason he's down this low. If he was playing a defense like the Chargers or the Vikings or the Steelers, he'd probably be inside the top 25, maybe even inside the top 20. And as promised, my underdog flex option of the week at the wide receiver position, not inside the top 30 here. And honestly, it's kind of a little bit boring, but it's Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers. Listen, after week 1 fantasy football, I came out and said, we can't make a prediction on who this wide receiver 1 is in this particular Carolina offense. Those days have passed us. We have more information now on who their wide receiver 1 is over the last 2 weeks, and it's Adam Thielen by a long shot. It's not even close, man. And Andy Dalton, I had made a prediction before the week where I said veteran quarterback, veteran wide receiver. They're both kind of journeyman guys. It's going to work, and it did. Andy Dalton and Adam Thielen were a very good combination this past week. Good thing is, Andy Dalton is expected to start again this week as they take on the Minnesota Vikings. I think it lines up here again for Adam Thielen. The matchup is good. He's the clear wide receiver one. The target share is there. So let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments below and what matchup questions you need answered before week 4 fantasy football. And if you want to see some buy low trade targets that you need to target before week 4 fantasy football, click on this video right here.